My name's Christian. I'm your guys' TA this semester, and I also am on the debate team, and I'm a junior. And then I'm going to introduce our other two debaters. So our first debater is going to be Luke, and he will be arguing for social media in relationships, and he is a junior on Pepperdine's debate team. And then our opposition today is going to be Juan Carlos, and he is a senior on Pepperdine's debate team. So to begin, I'm going to hand it off to Luke to begin with opposition. So he will be reading his argument. And also throughout this debate, Wonka, you are more than welcome to raise your hand and ask questions.
All right. Well, if we're all ready, let's get this kicked off. Social media. Most of us use it. Some of us love it. Some of us hate it. Some of us have a mixed relationship. We sometimes love it, sometimes hate it. Now, I admittedly am in that third camp. Sometimes I love social media, and sometimes it's really, really obnoxious. But what I'm going to be doing today is looking at the positive and negatives of social media and showing you how the end, when it relates to social change, social media is a conduit for positive social change. But before we get into the reasons why I believe this is true, let's first look at some framework or some definitions and some weighing mechanisms so that we can know the framing of this debate round. The one main definition I want to talk about is social media. I don't think this is going to be really controversial. Social media is an application or website primarily used for social interaction on the internet. Some examples include Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, any internet application or website that's used for social interaction. Now that we know what the resolution is talking about, let's move on to the weighing mechanism for today's debate round, or basically how in the end you can decide which side won the round. The weighing mechanism is pretty simple. Net benefits. Affirmative must prove that the positive outweighs the negatives, and the negative must prove that the negatives outweigh the positives. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm not going to be saying that there is no negative effect on social change from social media, but rather I'm going to be saying that the positive outweighs those negative effects. Now that we've gotten through that and we look at the framework, let's move on to the meat of today's debate round under the contentions. I have four main contentions. I'm going to try to get to all of them, but we'll see if I have enough time. Starting off with the first contention of it connects people. Again, it connects people. The first point under this is that connections to people you wouldn't otherwise meet. You see, social media gives access and insight into people and cultures that users wouldn't typically get to experience. For example, I was able to connect with people in Europe and I still talk to them while I was there. I was able to connect to them through social media and maintain those relationships through social media. And I wouldn't have gotten to maintain and even obtain most of those relationships if it hadn't been for social media. The impact of this, or the reason why this is so important for social change, is that it reduces hateful ideologies. You see, hate and fear often spawn from ignorance. My dad always used to tell me that racism, the key root of racism, is ignorance. And that when a people is ignorant of another race, culture, sexuality, or anything like that, they're more likely to be hateful of that thing. Social media helps dispel those stereotypes, helps reduce the ignorance surrounding other races and cultures, and it therefore reduces the hateful ideologies towards them. The second contention is mobilization. And this one's a little bit more heavy, a little bit more meaty. The first point under this is that it provides a platform to organize. Essentially, it allows for groups and movements to mobilize rallies, protests, events, and other such things that are essential for social change to occur. Just look at the Black Lives Matter protests this past summer. A lot of those protests were organized on social media. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't have been able to find out where the protests in my area were taking place if it hadn't been for Facebook. I wouldn't have been able to engage in positive social change if it hadn't been for social media. A lot of people wouldn't have been able to engage in that social change if it hadn't been for the organizational power of social media. Another thing is it increases the reach of movements to people who would otherwise not see or hear the message being sent. It allows people who typically wouldn't hear the message to hear the message being spread. The impact of these 2 points, after I get through this impact, I'll take your question. The impact of these 2 points is that it gives marginalized and underrepresented groups a voice. Here's some examples. Young people. it gives young people a voice when typically young people don't have a voice. Think of any election in the past 50 years, or in fact, in the entire history of America, where young people has had as much of an influence on the political discourse that they have today. And the reason for that is because of social media such as TikTok, where young people are allowed to voice their opinions and allowed to have that as a megaphone, essentially, to reach for positive social change. I already talked about Black Lives Matter, and the same thing can be said about a lot of progressive politics. Now I'll take your question.
Yes. Let's remember the whole entire question here. Does social media have a positive impact on interpersonal relationships? Interpersonal, you didn't define. Could you define interpersonal relationships?
I believe the question is social media a conduit for positive social change? I'm not 100% sure if I saw anything about interpersonal relationships, but just in case, I will actually be talking about that in just a second. But if you do want a definition of interpersonal relationships, it's basically a relationship between two people or groups of people. Next, moving on to my third contention, which is of mental health. The this is a pretty important contention to me. It's actually the number one thing that social media has done for me personally, and a lot of my friends have said the same thing. And the first point under this is that it raises awareness and understanding. You see, perhaps the most significant way social media has affected me personally is mental health. I've had my fair share of mental health challenges, as have most of my peers. Social media has not only raised awareness about mental health, helping people recognize warning signs and get help when needed, but it has also increased the understanding of mental illness and helped to remove the stigma that surrounds it. Now, how does this relate to social change? It relates to social change because when we think of social change, we normally think of things like racism, sexism, and all that. And those are parts of social change. But another part of social change is the mental health stigmas, the mental health environment, and the way we approach mental health. That's part of our society, and there's something we need to change in a positive direction, and that's something that social media has done. The impact of this is that it gets people to get help when they need it by allowing them to know when they need to get help and how to need to get help, and it lets them function better in society by removing those stigmas. For example, I was recently diagnosed with bipolar disorder. 20 years ago, before the internet, if you told somebody you had bipolar disorder, they avoid you because they think you're crazy. Nowadays, when I tell people I have bipolar disorder, they go, "Oh, okay. I kind of understand where you're coming from. Obviously, I can't understand fully, but I know that you're still a real person and you have real emotions and you aren't crazy." And so it allows me to better interact in that society. I have another contention, but I think I'm going to keep it just for a response later on because I'm running out of time. But in conclusion, what can we see here? We can see that in the end, social media may have negative effects, which I'm sure the negative speaker is going to be talking about, but the positive effects vastly outweigh them. It connects people that you wouldn't otherwise meet. It mobilizes movements and organizations, and it raises awareness and mental health. For all these reasons, you should vote government. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. So now we're going to be moving on to Wonka with the opposition.
Mhm. Thank you, Christian. Um, Thank you so much for coming to this debate. I will start my time now. We have heard from the opposition, from the affirming side, the reasons why at the end, the social media aspect has a positive impact on interpersonal relationships. And the speaker has talked about three main points. And before getting to my points of positive matter on why I believe that, in fact, social media does not have a positive impact on interpersonal relationships, I will first offer some rebuttals to his three main points. First of all, the speaker came forward and said that there were going to be connections between people that he would have never found. Luke, is your pronouns he, him? Okay. He obviously came up forward and talked about this. However, he neglected the fact that social media can also become echo chambers. Thank God that he was born in a society that, taught him well and that taught him about good moral ethics. However, he obviously neglects the fact that we have Proud Boys creating these echo chambers of white supremacy that are in fact inherently causing more harm than good because of the essential race that they have. A white person creating this has more power systemically than a Black or a brown individual that is doing this and creating echo chambers that in the end systematically can inform people in power to also create more laws that are not benefiting BIPOC individuals. The second point that the speaker came was the platform for groups and movements. The speaker came forward and talked about the Black Lives Matter protest. However, it neglects the fact that who gets involved in these, right? It's already the people that are already engaged. It's not the people that are 16 and younger who are getting engaged. It's people like him that are college students, that are quote unquote woke. This by extension also leads me to beg the question of who is he really speaking about here? He's neglecting, he's believing that his own experience is a rule of thumb for everybody, when in reality is only for people like him who have been born in a consciously environment, who have gone to college, who have been educated, who have actually had access to internet. So it just neglects the fact that there are other people that are at disadvantage when it comes to social media, and then it creates a negative impact because the individuals who do have social media and use it as an echo chamber create more harm than good for Black and brown individuals in society. And then the third point he brought up forward, once again, was mental health and how social media is a conduit for mental health. But research time and time has proven that social media has a negative impact because of the algorithms. This is something that the speaker neglected completely, and I would like for them to talk about more. It's just how does social media actually have a positive impact? Once again, the speaker talked about his own mental health and how that helped him. But once again, his experience is not the rule of thumb for everybody. He is a white man. Of course, he doesn't represent the reality of everyone in the world, especially if the bar is set high with for example, whiteness and European features being the ultimate symbols of what attractiveness is, which inherently probably doesn't impact him, but it would impact a Black individual, a brown individual, neglecting their mental health and causing more harm than good for individuals that are on social media on that. So for all these reasons, I just don't believe that social media has a positive impact. And now let me get into my points of positive matter as to specificalities on why. So first of all, the big argument that I will make is that if you can't create a positive impact in the interpersonal relationships in society, then social media cannot create a positive macro impact for marginalized communities in the United States. So first, I will defend the first part of that if-then statement. You cannot create a positive impact on interpersonal relationships through social media. How? Because it creates competitions and friendships. We have seen time and time again the like button being exploited for more people to be able to access their status in society, using likes and buying likes, in fact, to get people to be viewing them. So in reality, competition is not a basis of genuine inherent altruism, but rather it is a conduit for selfish, baseless needs. And this is seen through the like button, this is seen through the competition of the events that people attend, and which creates a lot of division, which is my second sub point of that, a division, right? So if you have individuals that are following you because of everywhere that you've been going and the likes that you have, then this creates echo chambers, which again, the speaker did not address firmly. Echo chambers are dangerous because they inherently affect Black and brown individuals. And so as we have been seeing with the Proud Boys conundrum, advertisement of all these things on social media actually create echo chambers that do not lead to positive impact, but rather a digression from impact, a digression from process and formal change. And so the third subpoint in that is that this is all an illusion, that the fact that the speaker is coming forward and saying that social media has a positive impact is really just an illusion of progress. So the upshot to that is it cannot create a positive impact for a macro impact for marginalized communities. And I will now prove up with the following 2 points. It's an illusion that social media is creating consciousness for everybody and equality in the United States. The people who have been least engaged with the Black Lives Matter movement have been white people. The speaker is a white man who obviously neglected the fact that there's white people out there who are also, and I'm a white man too, who are also not being participating. In a recent study, it showed that only 30% of white individuals, no, that 60%, let me fact check this real quickly because I have it pulled up. We have been seeing time and time again how the amount of people who have been the least engaged have been white individuals. Let me try to find this for you, excuse me. It's taking me a little bit, and I can substantiated after the speaker comes again. But the statistics surely prove that 2/3 of the people that have least been engaged in the Black Lives Matter movement have been white individuals, and it comes from the pewsocialtrends.org. And more than that, the second subpoint in this is that consciousness does not mean the majority is inherently going to support it. And I can substantiate that claim further in my next points. And for all these reasons, I believe that that's why inherently social media does not have an extensive impact in society, and thus a negative impact as a whole, which marginalizes further Black and Brown individuals in society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wonka. Okay, now we're going to be going back to Luke, and he is going to be giving his rebuttals.
All right. Let me get my timer started. Okay. All right, let's get started. Well, like I said at the beginning of my last speech, I'm not here to tell you that social media is the end-all be-all solution to positive social change. There are negatives and there are positives. But my point is that the positives outweigh the negatives, and that's what I'm going to be proving today in my speech. In response to the first contention that I brought up about connecting people, he talked about echo chambers, and he brought up the Proud Boys, and he mentioned this throughout his previous speech, talking about how the Proud Boys are a big problem and these echo chambers are a big problem. And I would agree, echo chambers are a problem. But the thing is that what impact on society has the Proud Boys had? Yes, they're a negative impact on society, but I would argue that the positive impact of social media has grossly outweighed the negative impact of groups such as the Proud Boys on social media. Obviously, the Proud Boys are terrible and everything they do is bad and should be condemned. But is the negative impact of the Proud Boys outweigh the positive impacts of social media that I've mentioned in my previous speech and will continue to mention in this speech? I guess we'll find out. Let's move on to the second point. In response to the issue of mobilization, my opponent talked about how he said, who gets involved? We don't really know who gets involved. These kids aren't getting involved. It's just typically the people who were already involved. My first response to this is it increases access. Many people that I know that weren't previously politically involved got politically involved because they engaged with political content on social media. It increased the access to political content, increased the access to understanding of that political content, not right now, and it gave them access to this political content and gave them a platform to engage in. Without social media, they never would have engaged in social change and in political change. This was flat out told to me by multiple different people, and it's not just a anecdotal evidence. I guarantee you that the numbers back this up. It increases access. The internet inherently increases access to a broad range of things. How many people would be reading the New York Times articles on the Black Lives Matter movement? How many people would be watching the George Floyd video if it hadn't been for Twitter? Zero. No people would be watching that George Floyd video because it wouldn't have had a platform to be uploaded to. The entire social movement that was sparked by that video wouldn't have happened because there wouldn't have been a platform for it to spread. It inherently required social media in order for this movement to start. Not right now. No questions at this moment. My second response to this is, again, this isn't a negative point. He's just basically saying, well, the positive impact is minimal. Okay, it's still a positive impact. If I can prove even a minimal positive impact, I win today's debate round. Moving on to the third point. He talked about how social media hurts mental health. And there is a lot of studies saying that too much use of social media can negatively impact your mental health. Then he asked, well, he didn't tell us why it helps or how it helps mental health. Actually, I did. My first point was that it raises awareness. It raises awareness on mental health issues. Social media campaigns on male suicide in the country, male depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and all other types of mental illnesses have raised awareness. Gen Z is the most aware of mental illness of any generation in the history of the planet. And the reason? Social media. It has created a platform for us to discuss and understand other people and how they live their lives, how they experience their lives, regardless of mental health, instead of putting them into these stigmatized boxes that they were in before social media. Like I said, and my opponent can call it anecdotal evidence as much as he said, as much as he wants. 20 years ago, somebody with bipolar disorder would not be accepted into society because the awareness of it was a stigma. Social media removed that stigma, and now people like me can interact and socialize in society without trying to hide that true part of their self. Moving on to the second point of how it reduces the stigma, that's the second reason why it helps mental health. Now, moving on to the point of positive matter that my opponent brought up, he talked a lot about interpersonal relationships. He said social media doesn't help interpersonal relationships. His first point on this was that of competitions, basically that people are competitive on social media and that hurts things. My first response to this is insignificant. Unless my opponent can bring up numbers to back it up, I don't. I find it hard to believe that competitive nature of social media has a significant impact on interpersonal relationships. My second response to this is everything is competitive with friends. That's always going to be that way. And simply saying that social media is that way too doesn't really prove that social media is a more negative or positive method of social change. My second response, the second point he brought up was talking about division. My response to this is actually it brings people together. If we look at the movements that have happened in the past 4 years, all of those movements have been a bringing of people together, people from different walks of life, and have occurred primarily on social media. The next thing he talked about was the illusion of progress. And then he talked about how the majority of people don't support. My response to this is that first, it's not just an illusion of progress. There would be no justice for George Floyd if it wasn't for Twitter. Let me say that again. There would be no justice for George Floyd if it wasn't for Twitter. Why? Because the only reason that there was able to stir up the amount of outrage that occurred was because of social media. Because somebody posted a video of the police officer kneeling on his neck on social media, and people were able to express their opinions. And my opponent can laugh as much as he wants, but it's the simple truth that if it wasn't for social media, people wouldn't have been able to express their opinions. People like me don't get to go on talk shows and talk about it. You know who gets to go and talk on talk shows and news shows about things like this? Rich white people. Rich white people don't want us to dismantle the police, and so they wouldn't be working towards getting justice for George Floyd. The point here is that social media provides a platform for people like you, me, and Christian, and everybody else watching this debate to talk and discuss about these things, stir up outrage against injustice, and allow for positive social change. It allows us to push for social change. It allows us to cancel people who are toxic and spewing toxic rhetoric into our culture and into our society. It is a fact, a well-known fact, that without social media, many of the social movements that we have today would not be possible, because the way that they were sparked was through social media, and the way that the outrage was versed, and the way that people were able to get their voice out, and the way that people were able to organize to go protest, all of it was because of social media, and none of it would have happened without it. And for that reason, I strongly urge you to vote government. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Luke, for that rebuttal. Now we're going to have Wonka up next with his rebuttal.
Thank you, Luke, for that. So basically what I'm hearing is that the civil rights era was not possible because they didn't have social media. Do you hear how absurd that sounds? I would like to start up this next round of the debate by talking about first some points of rebuttal towards the opposition, and then finalize with continuing to substantiate why social media does not create a positive macro impact for marginalized communities. The speaker, I hope that you have already seen throughout this entire debate, is relying on anecdotal evidence to substantiate why he believes that for him and his friends, his very minute circle of people represent the majority of Americans. And so the point that I would first like to rebut was his point that social media, essentially what he's saying is that social media causes, do you hear that? Causes every single movement that we have seen right now so far. But he has neglected the big entire fact that it was COVID-19. COVID-19 held us down inside of our homes. And basically what it caused us to do was to pause and think. I assure you that had it been no questions right now, since you didn't give me a chance last time either, last time we saw a whole bunch of outpouring of support for the Black Lives Matter movement. It wasn't because that social media helped it. I wasn't saying that. It was Black Lives Matter, the organization itself, that had been campaigning for this for a long time. So, oh, holy God, social media, you're not the one that we're trying to praise here for the Black Lives Matter movement this summer and the Black Lives Matter movement for the past 10 and decades. It has actually been the organization itself that has done that. And to even substantiate that point, you said that it allowed your friends to get involved. Well, research proves, and I just found it, the NPR article came out and it said that the people that have been least engaged with the Black Lives Matter movement, despite all of this Twitter thing, was white people. 30% of white people have taken personally actions to better understand racial relations in America. Actions. 30% America, 50 to 60% of America is white. And the fact that even after all of this social media bandwagon, it goes to show it doesn't have an influence for the Black and the brown community in the United States. And second point off of that, attributing justice to George Floyd, just the fact that the man had been sent to jail is not enough. They needed a whole bunch of more things. They need the Black individuals in the United States need reparations. We need more than just putting somebody in locking them in jail. That individual, it's not George Floyd, it's Breonna Taylor. It's everyone else that has been suffering. So social media hasn't caused a net benefit for marginalized communities. You only mentioned one case possibly, and even that is weak in itself. So the fact that you come over here and tell us that this is creating a net benefit for all Black individuals in the US and all the Black men who have been personally brutalized by the police is not enough to say that it has caused a net impact, positive impact through social media for marginalized communities in the US. So with that being said, I will now go back to substantiating my claim. Like I mentioned, 30% of Americans have been engaged, 30% of white Americans have been engaged, meaning 30% of Americans who actually hold power in the United States. Let me be clear, this is a systemic racial issue that we have in the United States. And to claim that social media causes, remember what he's saying, it causes. Social media doesn't cause anything. The only thing that it can perhaps claim to cause is just awareness, but even then it's weak in itself because it doesn't create further actions that actually help the marginalized individuals in society, as I've been telling you. Black individuals were more involved, Hispanic individuals were more involved, Asian individuals were more involved, 41, 51, and 94 and 49%. But I can assure you it wasn't because of social media, since the opponent is using anecdotal evidence. It's not because of social media. It's actually because my dad, as a brown man, definitely suffers the consequences of systemic racism and definitely cannot afford to be on the sidelines, unlike many white Americans in the US. And even he didn't have social media or even was in the bandwagon. He came out and protested with me. So definitely doesn't go to show that social media causes the net benefits that the opponent is claiming. But you differ.
Yeah, so you keep saying cause. Would you agree that the motion states conduit, not cause?
Well,
Conduit for?
well, let me restate what you said. You basically said that social media is in itself what has allowed that causal relationship you're stating is what is you're attributing every single success that has been happening with the Black Lives Matter protest, with every awareness to social media, when in fact you neglect the fact that there's news outlets, there's the TV, there's the newspaper and paper and print, and even that in itself is creating more change. There's organizations like the Black Lives Matter organization. So to be attributing social media as the positive conduit for everything, I disagree. And with all of those reasons, that's why I believe in the end we come back to the idea that if you can't create a positive impact in interpersonal relationships, like I mentioned, it creates competition, division, and it's an illusion. And I did state that it causes a negative impact on mental health. The likes, the competition, none of that is benefiting individuals because it's really causing individuals to really have the illusion that their friendship is substantiated when it really isn't. Then that is not creating a positive macro impact for marginalized communities, because then the least engaged have been white individuals, the people who hold power in the US.
All right, thank you guys so much, both. That is the end of our debate. Thank you for joining us, and we can't wait to hear your responses in the class and in the chat. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke. Thank you,
Yeah,
Christian.
thank you guys.